Georgia became a blue state in the most recent election. Joining me now is Evan Malbrough, a Democratic organizer and the founder of Georgia Youth Poll Worker Project. Evan, All-Star Weekend is a huge thing, and I'm going to put aside the fact that folks are getting on planes and going in cars to Atlanta for the All-Star Game in the middle of a global pandemic. I'm just going to put that aside. That's another segment. But in your view, how can LeBron use this weekend to get Georgia voters even more engaged, particularly black and brown voters who put Georgia over the top in the presidential and Senate elections?
I would say raising the awareness, right? A lot of times after election, there's a huge cool off, right? And that's usually when these reforms slide through, right? So I think the best thing is to use your platform to inform people about what's going on, right? Because these legislators represent people, right? There are people who voted for these senators and these General Assembly people who voted absentee, who won't be able to do that if these bills pass, right? So getting that information out there so people can call their legislators is an amazing thing to do, as well as taking the corporate angle. Because as the ABC reporter said before, a lot of horrible bills in our state have been stopped by the Georgia business community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about the fact that Georgia and Atlanta specifically has a number of large companies. I mean, that are just larger than others like Delta and Coca-Cola that we've mentioned that have that power politically. You spent a lot of time encouraging younger people to be more involved, which is so important. Do you think, in your view, that college-age voters in the state of Georgia are aware that this is happening? I mean, everybody was paying attention to the presidential election. Everybody was paying attention to the runoffs. But are they still tuned in?
They are tuned in, but the problem is we just have so many issues that it's hard to focus on everything at once, or it's impossible to focus on everything at once, right? We're trying to push the federal government, right, to enact COVID-19 reforms, or enact student loan reforms, right? Doing all those things, and now we have to also worry about our state governments, right? So, our generation was always admonished for not voting, right? When we protest, they said, you need to vote. When we riot, we said, you need to vote. And then after we vote, now for 2 months later, not even 2 months later, right? They're saying, well, you didn't vote the right way, so how about we restrict it, right? Because in the state of Georgia, 1 in 5 people who voted were young people. So this is a surgical dismantlement of our ability to make our voice heard, especially as the largest generation.
Is it obvious to young people of color that they're targeting, black and brown voters specifically? Because, Georgia's not any other state. We're not talking about New Hampshire, right? Georgia has a very specific history with voter suppression. And, because they're a southern state, obviously the Jim Crow era, we all know about that. Congressman John Lewis was from Georgia. It has a very specific history. Does that play into how people view these restrictive laws? I mean, are they making that direct link between these laws and before the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act in 64 and 65?
Oh, absolutely. That history is very, very apparent, right? Growing up in Atlanta myself, along with many other of my peers growing up in Atlanta, we know of the histories and legacies of people like John Lewis, of people like James Chaney and Warner, of people like Andrew Young. My school was named after Andrew Young, right? So we know those legacies. So because of that, because it's so ingrained with us, when we see this, we know what's going on. We know what's happening. So I definitely believe that there is knowledge, and that's why you see young people leading protests at the Capitol. That's why you see young people making their voices heard on social media and through op-eds and through letters to the editors, because we know how important our vote is in our state, and we know that because of that, there are forces at bay that will try to inhibit that.
What about young people running for these state houses themselves? I mean, a lot of these restrictions are on the state level in Georgia and other states as well. But it seems to me that nothing is stopping, one of these 25-year-old voters or even 22-year-old voters from saying, maybe I should be the one to step up and run for the Georgia state legislature so that, we're not putting voter suppression on the floor for a vote. We're putting voter expansion and education programs on the floor for a vote. What about young people running for these state houses themselves? I mean, a lot of these restrictions are on the state level in Georgia and other states as well. But it seems to me that nothing is stopping, one of these 25-year-old voters or even 22-year-old voters from saying, maybe I should be the one to step up and run for the Georgia state legislature so that, we're not putting voter suppression on the floor for a vote. We're putting voter expansion and education programs on the floor for a vote.
Absolutely. I definitely know there is a huge resurgence of people trying to run. A few of my friends have called me and said, hey, man, I want to run on the local level or run at the federal level for a congressional seat. So that stuff is there. I mean, I believe one of the Georgia state legislators, Park Cannon, she actually has a book, how to run for office as a young person. So, yes, those things are coming. But the problem is these bills hurt us from running. Right? First off, we're still paying for the 2010 census, right? We're still paying for the 2010 census with gerrymandered districts. And now, with more restrictive voting laws, how am I as a young person able to galvanize my base without wait for them to show their turnout, right? So these bills aren't only stopping young people from voting, they're stopping young people's chances for representing their communities.
Yeah, I think that that's such a good point to end on. Evan Marlborough, thank you so much for joining me and for letting us understand helping us to understand all the things on the ground with young people in Georgia. And looking forward to this All-Star game because it is unprecedented in many ways to have a star as big as LeBron doing this. Thank you for being here. NBA stars won't be